He wanted a wife who would demand nothing and say even less. A mute orphan was the perfect pawn to secure his lineage without risking his frozen heart. But the Duke never anticipated the dead of night, a hidden nursery, and a haunting melody that would unravel his entire world. The year was 1872, and London high society was a viper's nest of whispered scandals and calculated alliances. At the centre of its predatory gaze stood Arthur Cavendish, the 8th Duke of Rothford. At 32, Arthur was a man sculpted from ice and marble, formidable, staggeringly wealthy, and entirely devoid of warmth. 5 years prior, he had been a different man, one who believed in the foolish illusion of love. But that naive version of Arthur died the night he caught his betrothed, Lady Josephine, fleeing for the continent, in a carriage with his own younger brother, Edward. Their treacherous elopement was cut brutally short when the carriage careened off a rain-slicked bridge in Kent, killing them both. Arthur did not weep at their twin funerals. Instead, he locked the gates of Rothford Abbey, buried his heart alongside his traitorous brother, and vowed never to allow another woman the power to destroy him. Yet the duchy required an heir. The Cavendish line could not end with him. His mother, the Dowager Duchess of Pembroke, sent endless parades of debutantes to his London townhouse, chattering desperate girls reciting poetry they didn't understand, flashing smiles that did not reach their eyes. They wanted his title. They wanted his estates. They wanted the very soul he no longer possessed. Arthur despised them all. He realized that if he were forced by the heavy hand of duty to take a bride, she would not be one of these grasping aristocrats. He needed a vessel for his legacy, not a companion. He wanted absolute, uninterrupted silence. His twisted solution brought him to the bleak wrought-iron gates of St. Jude's Asylum for Orphaned Girls in the slums of Whitechapel. The matron, Mrs. Agatha Gable, a severe woman smelling of lye and boiled cabbage, nearly fainted when the crest of the Duke of Rothford appeared on the carriage door. When Arthur coldly stated his grim request, a girl of marriageable age, healthy but utterly incapable of speech, Mrs. Gable thought it was a cruel jest. But the heavy bag of gold sovereigns dropped onto her rotting wooden desk silenced her objections. "There is one, Your Grace." Mrs. Gable stammered, leading the towering Duke through the damp, echoing corridors. "Genevieve. She was left on the parish steps 10 years ago. She hasn't spoken a single syllable since the day the constables dragged her in. The physician claimed it was a fright that stole her tongue. She is 19 now, a docile thing, but perfectly healthy." Arthur stood in the doorway of the laundry room. Through the billowing clouds of steam, he saw her. Genevieve Dubois. She did not possess the rosy, powdered perfection of Mayfair's debutantes. She was painfully thin, her hands raw from lye, her ash-blonde hair tied back with a frayed string. But her face possessed a haunting, ethereal symmetry, and her eyes, a striking, tempestuous shade of storm grey, held a profound, immovable stillness. When she looked up and met the Duke's piercing blue gaze, she did not flinch. She did not curtsy. She merely watched him, a quiet observer of her own bleak existence. "Her," Arthur commanded. Within 48 hours, the paperwork was signed. There was no courtship. There was no grand announcement in the Times. In a dim, echoing chapel, with only his solicitor and the bewildered matron as witnesses, Arthur Cavendish bound himself to a mute pauper. When they sat in the plush velvet interior of his carriage, heading north toward Yorkshire, Arthur finally spoke to his new Duchess. "Let us be clear, Genevieve," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that offered no comfort. "You have been elevated from the gutter to the highest echelons of the peerage. In exchange, I require only 2 things, your obedience and a son. Do not expect affection. Do not seek my company unless I summon you. We will live our lives apart, and in return, you will never know hunger or cold again. Nod if you understand. Genevieve sat perfectly upright, her delicate hands folded in the lap of her stiff new travelling gown. For a fleeting second, Arthur thought he saw a flash of sorrow in those storm-grey eyes, a deep, knowing melancholy that made his chest inexplicably tight. But the moment passed. She dipped her chin in a single obedient nod. The bargain was struck. Life at Rothford Abbey was as suffocatingly silent as Arthur had promised. The sprawling Gothic estate, with its imposing gargoyles and endless shadow-draped corridors, swallowed Genevieve whole. Yet to the profound shock of the estate staff, the new Duchess did not cower. Without a single spoken word, Genevieve began to breathe life into the mausoleum Arthur called home. She communicated through graceful gestures and notes, written in a surprisingly elegant looping script. She learned the names of every servant. When the head housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, fell ill with a fever, it was Genevieve who sat by her bedside, in the servants' quarters, pressing cool cloths to her forehead. When a stray hound was caught in a snare on the property, it was the Duchess who knelt in the mud, ruining her silk skirts to gently bandage its leg. Arthur observed all of this from the shadowed balconies of his library. He watched his silent wife move through his home like a ghost of spring, thawing the frost that had covered the abbey for 5 years. He told himself it was mere curiosity that kept his eyes fixed upon her. He told himself the strange, erratic beating of his heart when she offered him a timid, gentle smile across the dinner table was just exhaustion. He was a man made of stone, and stone didn't feel. By the winter of 1873, society could no longer ignore the scandal of the Duke of Rothford's bizarre marriage. The whispers in London eventually bled into Yorkshire, culminating in an unavoidable invitation. The Duke and Duchess of Somerset, the neighbouring estate, were hosting a grand Yuletide masquerade, and Arthur's absence would be seen as a sign of weakness. "We are attending," Arthur told Genevieve in her chambers, handing her a velvet box containing the Cavendish family diamonds. "Keep your mask on. Stay by my side. Let them stare. They are nothing but vultures waiting for a carcass to pick apart." Genevieve wrote on her small slate, "I will not shame you." When they arrived at the Somerset estate, the ballroom fell into a hushed, suffocating silence. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the Duke and his beggar bride. Genevieve was a vision in midnight blue silk, the diamonds resting against her collarbone like captured stars. She held her head high, her posture immaculate, projecting a quiet dignity that rattled the judgmental aristocrats. But society is inherently cruel, and none were crueler than Lady Gwendolen Fairchild, a vicious beauty who had long believed she would be the Duchess of Rothford. During the supper service, Gwendolen, emboldened by champagne, leaned across the table. "Tell me, Your Grace," she sneered, her voice carrying over the string quartet, targeting Genevieve. "Is it true what they say in the city that your husband purchased you for the price of a decent hunting hound? It must be terribly frustrating for the Duke having a wife who cannot even grunt in gratitude." A collective gasp echoed down the long dining table. Genevieve froze the silver fork, trembling slightly in her hand. Her storm-grey eyes dropped to her plate, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Arthur's grip on his crystal wine glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. The silence in the room stretched taut as a bowstring. He had promised himself he would not care for this girl. She was merely an arrangement. But looking at Genevieve's bowed head, a sudden blinding rage surged through his veins. Arthur stood up slowly. His chair scraped violently against the marble floor. "Lady Gwendolen." Arthur's voice was lethally soft, yet it cut through the room like a physical blade. "My wife's silence is a virtue you would do well to study. In the few months she has graced my home, she has shown more nobility, grace and intellect without uttering a single word than you have demonstrated in a lifetime of ceaseless, vapid chattering." Gwendolen's face drained of colour. If any person in this room speaks a word against the Duchess of Rothford," Arthur continued, his eyes sweeping the terrified guests, "you will find me a very unforgiving enemy. Come, Genevieve. The air here has grown foul." He extended his hand. Genevieve looked up at him, her eyes wide, shimmering with unshed tears. She placed her small, trembling hand in his, and Arthur led her out of the ballroom. In the carriage ride back to the Abbey, she didn't write on her slate. Instead, she gently rested her head against his shoulder. For the first time in 5 years, Arthur didn't pull away. He draped his heavy wool coat over her shivering frame, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. But the true shattering of Arthur Cavendish's world was yet to come. It happened 3 weeks later, during the worst blizzard Yorkshire had seen in a decade. The Abbey was snowed in the wind, howling like a wounded beast against the stained glass windows. Arthur's nephew, little Leo, the 5-year-old orphaned son of his treacherous brother Edward, and Lady Josephine, lived in the remote east wing of the Abbey. Arthur provided for the boy financially, but could not bear to look at him. Leo possessed his father's exact shade of auburn hair, a daily walking reminder of the ultimate betrayal. The boy was largely left to the care of a rotating cast of exhausted nannies. That night, Arthur was trapped in his study, nursing a glass of scotch, unable to escape the ghosts of his past. The storm outside mirrored the violent tempest in his mind. Around midnight, a strange sound drifted down the dark, cavernous hallway. Arthur froze. He set his glass down. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice. It was a woman's voice, impossibly pure and sorrowful, weaving through the stone corridors. She was singing. The melody was a French lullaby, sweet and profoundly melancholy, carrying an emotional weight that made the hairs on the back of Arthur's neck stand up. Fais dodo, mon petit ange. Go to sleep, my little angel. Arthur grabbed a silver candelabra, his pulse hammering in his ears. Was it a servant, no maid, possessed a voice of such heartbreaking, trained perfection? It sounded like an opera phantom haunting the halls. He stepped out of his study, letting the ethereal sound guide him through the freezing shadows of the Abbey. The singing grew louder as he approached the east wing, the wing he expressly forbade anyone to mention. The nursery. He pushed the heavy oak door open just a fraction. The fire in the hearth had died down to glowing embers. Sitting on the edge of the child's bed was Genevieve. Little Leo, who suffered from horrific night terrors and often screamed for hours, was fast asleep, his head resting peacefully against Genevieve's chest. And Genevieve was singing. Her lips moved, producing a sound so flawlessly beautiful, so filled with raw, aching love that Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. It was not a croak. It was not the rusted sound of a vocal cord unused for a decade. It was the voice of a siren, rich and melodic, steeped in a history Arthur knew absolutely nothing about. Ton chagrin s'envolera avec la nuit. Your sorrow will fly away with the night. She stroked the sleeping boy's auburn hair, tears silently tracking down her own porcelain cheeks as she sang into the darkness, believing herself completely alone. Arthur stood in the doorway, paralyzed. The mute orphan he had married to avoid love, the silent pawn he had brought into his home, could speak. She could sing. A fierce, terrifying cocktail of emotions violently seized Arthur's chest, betrayal, awe, and an undeniable, overwhelming realization that he had already fallen desperately in love with her. But as the last beautiful note of the lullaby faded into the storm, a darker, far more dangerous question anchored itself in the Duke's mind. If Genevieve had possessed this magnificent voice all along, why had she chosen the brutal, punishing life of a mute for 10 years? What unspeakable terror was his wife, hiding from Arthur, stepped out of the freezing shadows and into the dim amber light of the nursery hearth? The floorboards groaned beneath his boots. Genevieve gasped. The hauntingly beautiful melody snapped instantly into silence. She spun around, her storm-grey eyes, wide, with a sheer, unadulterated terror that Arthur had never seen before. She instinctively threw her arms over little Leo, shielding the sleeping boy, as if expecting a physical blow. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving as she stared at the towering figure of her husband. For a long, agonizing moment, neither moved. The only sound was the savage howling of the Yorkshire blizzard, battering the window panes. Arthur's mind was a battlefield. He had built his entire existence upon the foundation of her silence. He had purchased a ghost. Yet here stood a woman of flesh, blood, and spectacular secrets. He looked at her not with the fury of a betrayed lord, but with a profound, aching realization that she had suffered far more than he ever had. "You can speak," Arthur said. His voice was not the commanding boom of the Duke of Rothford, but a fractured, hoarse whisper. 10 years, Genevieve. 10 years in that wretched asylum, scrubbed raw by lie, beaten for your muteness. Why? Genevieve pressed her back against the headboard, tears spilling over her lashes. She opened her mouth, but the habit of silence was a heavy iron chain. She choked on the air, shaking her head, frantically reaching for the small chalkboard she kept in her apron pocket. Arthur crossed the room in 3 long strides. He knelt beside the small bed. For the first time since their hollow wedding day, he reached out and gently caught her trembling hands, pulling them away from the slate. His touch was warm, anchoring her in the freezing room. No more chalk, no more silence. Arthur pleaded, his icy exterior completely shattered. "I am your husband. I swore an oath to protect you before God, even if I didn't understand what that meant at the time. Please, talk to me." Genevieve looked into his piercing blue eyes. For months she had seen the hidden sorrow behind his cold mask. She had seen the man who bandaged Hound's paws and financially supported his traitorous brother's son. She took a shuddering breath. They will kill me." The words were fragile, heavily laced with a beautiful, distinct French accent. The sound of her speaking voice sent a fresh tremor down Arthur's spine. "No one will touch you," Arthur vowed, his grip tightening. "Who, Genevieve? Who did this to you?" With her hands, still encased in his Genevieve's walls, finally crumbled. The story spilled from her lips like water from a broken dam. She was not Geneviève Dubois, a nameless pauper. She was Geneviève de Marly, the sole surviving daughter of Charles de Marly, a prominent French financier and diplomat who had resided in Mayfair. In the winter of 1862, her father had uncovered a massive treasonous embezzlement ring within the British Exchequer, a conspiracy that was siphoning Crown funds to arm radical separatists on the continent. "My father planned to take the ledgers to the Prime Minister," Genevieve whispered, her tears falling onto Arthur's knuckles. "But he was betrayed. I was 9 years old. I was hiding in the library, reading by the hearth when they broke in." Arthur listened in horrified silence as she recounted the nightmare. She had watched through the slats of an oak cabinet as a powerful English lord and his thugs brutally murdered her mother and father. "The leader, he demanded the ledgers. When my father refused, he slit his throat." She sobbed. "Before they left, the lord noticed my dropped book. He told his men to search the streets for the little French girl. 'If she speaks, she hangs us all. Find her and cut out her tongue,' he said. She had fled into the frozen London night, scrubbing her fine clothes in mud, hiding in the filthy alleys of Whitechapel. When the parish watchman found her, she realized her French accent was a death warrant. If she spoke, the powerful men hunting her would find her. So she chose the absolute safety of silence. She became a mute, nameless orphan." "Who was the man, Genevieve?" Arthur's voice was a low, lethal growl. The protective fury rising in his chest was absolute. "Give me his name. Genevieve trembled, closing her eyes. Lord Richard Danvers, the Viscount of Carlisle. Arthur's blood ran cold. Lord Danvers was not just a powerful peer, he was the Queen's appointed master of the hunt. He was a man deeply embedded in Arthur's own social circle. In fact, Danvers was on the guest list for the upcoming spring equinox hunt at Rothford Abbey. He is coming here next month, Arthur realized aloud, his jaw clenching. You must cast me out, Arthur, Genevieve begged, gripping his coat lapels. If he sees me, if he recognizes my eyes or hears my voice, he will ruin you. He will kill Leo. Please let me disappear. Arthur looked down at the woman who had brought light into his dead world. He looked at little Leo, sleeping peacefully under her protection. The frozen Duke of Rothford, who had sworn never to love again, leaned forward and pressed his lips gently against Genevieve's forehead. You are a Cavendish now, Arthur whispered fiercely against her skin. And we do not run from monsters. We hunt them. Over the next 4 weeks, Rothford Abbey transformed from a place of mourning into a fortress of calculated vengeance. Outwardly, the Duke and his mute Duchess prepared for the lavish spring equinox hunt. Inwardly, Arthur was a man at war. He broke his own rules of isolation, engaging in a dangerous game of correspondence. Relying on Genevieve's precise memories, Arthur hired a brilliant young detective from Scotland Yard, Inspector Frederick Aberline, funding a secret excavation of the old de Marley estate in Mayfair. Hidden beneath the floorboards of the ransacked library, exactly where Genevieve said her father had stashed them, Aberline found the blood-stained ledgers from 1862, the evidence against Danvers. The ledgers. Detailed accounts of Crown gold being shipped to French radicals bearing Danvers' signature. The murder weapon, an ornamental dagger left at the scene, traced back to the Carlisle armory. The witness Genevieve de Marley, ready to break a decade of silence. By the time the carriages of high society rolled up the gravel drive of Rothford Abbey in early April, Arthur's trap was set. The grand dining hall was a spectacle of gilded candelabras and extravagant wealth. Lord Richard Danvers sat to Arthur's right, boasting loudly of his recent investments, unaware of the noose tightening around his neck. Genevieve sat at the opposite end of the table wearing a high-collared gown of crimson velvet, playing her part as the silent, submissive wife. However, as the evening progressed, Danvers' eyes kept drifting toward the Duchess. The candlelight caught the striking storm-grey hue of her eyes. A flicker of unease crossed the older man's face. After dinner, the men retired to the billiard room, while the ladies took to the drawing room. But Genevieve, following Arthur's strict instructions, slipped away into the dimly lit portrait gallery. Danvers, whose paranoia had been gnawing at him since dessert, followed her. Arthur watched from the shadows of the balcony, Inspector Aberline, and 3 armed constables waiting in the adjacent corridor. A tragedy, your condition, your grace, Danvers said, smoothly stepping into the gallery and blocking Genevieve's exit. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized her bone structure. Though I must say, you possess a remarkable familiarity. Did you have family in London before the asylum? Genevieve stood her ground. Her heart battered against her ribs, but the terrifying little girl from the cabinet was gone. She was the Duchess of Rothford. I asked you a question, girl, Danvers snarled, dropping his aristocratic facade. He grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. Look at me. I have looked at you for 10 years, Lord Danvers, Genevieve said. Her voice, melodic and undeniably French, echoed like a gunshot in the quiet gallery. Danvers recoiled as if he had been burned. The colour drained completely from his face as the ghost of Charles de Marley's daughter materialized before him. You are dead. You died in the slums. My father's blood is still on your hands, she said, her voice steady and piercing. Danvers reached inside his tailored coat, pulling a silver-handled pistol, his eyes wide with a cornered rat's panic. You French whore, I'll finish what I started. click. I highly doubt that Richard, Arthur's voice, boomed from the darkness. Arthur stepped out from behind a marble bust, his own heavy Webley revolver, levelled directly at Danvers' chest. At the same moment, the heavy mahogany doors burst open. Inspector Abberline and the constables flooded the room, their weapons drawn. "Lord Richard Danvers!" Abberline announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for high treason against the Crown and the murders of Charles and Marie de Marley. We have the ledgers. The game is up." Danvers looked from the constables to the merciless barrel of Arthur's gun. The Viscount's arrogance shattered. The weapon slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. As they bound Danvers in irons and dragged him screaming through the grand halls of Rothford Abbey in full view of the horrified aristocratic guests, Arthur lowered his weapon. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming wave of relief. The gallery cleared, leaving only the Duke and his Duchess. The silence that fell between them was no longer oppressive or cold. It was the peaceful quiet after a devastating storm. Arthur holstered his gun and closed the distance between them. He gently took the wrist Danvers had bruised his thumb, tracing the red mark with infinite tenderness. "It is over," Arthur murmured, his eyes searching hers. "You never have to hide again, Genevieve. You have your voice. You can go anywhere. You can return to France, reclaim your family's estate. I will fund it all. You are free." Genevieve looked up at the towering, formidable man who had torn apart the aristocracy to avenge her. She reached up her soft hands, framing his sharp jawline. "You foolish man," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek, but a radiant smile breaking through her sorrow. "Do you not understand? I sang to Leo because I saw a child in pain. But I spoke to you because I realized I was already in love with you. I do not want France. I want my husband." Arthur's breath hitched. The thick ice that had encased his heart for 5 long years cracked, shattered, and melted entirely. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her ash-blonde hair, breathing in the scent of rosewater and rain. When he finally kissed her, it was not a cold bargain or a silent obligation. It was a fiercely passionate promise of forever. The following spring, the high society of London was forced to accept a new reality. The Duke of Rothford was no longer a reclusive phantom, and his wife was not a mute beggar. Together they legally adopted young Leo, raising him not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a beloved son. And every night the grand halls of Rothford Abbey were filled with the joyous echoes of laughter and the sweet, unbroken melody of a French lullaby. Did this sweeping tale of secrets, revenge, and a love that thawed a frozen heart leave you breathless? If you loved the Duke and Genevieve's journey from a silent bargain to an unbreakable bond, please hit that like button, share this video with fellow historical romance lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic audio stories that bring history and passion to life. Leave a comment below on your favorite twist.